Hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth Corrales, and today I will be talking about the impact of microplastics on marine ecosystems. This is an issue that affects not just ocean life, but also humans. So, what are microplastics? Microplastics are tiny particles that come from industrial waste, synthetic textiles, and consumer products. They are small, but their impact is massive. Because microplastics don't break down easily, they accumulate in marine environments, causing serious ecological problems. In this presentation, I will cover how microplastics affect marine life, their role in their food webs, and ways that we can address this issue. So, microplastics are defined as plastics fragments smaller than 5 millimeters, and they come from two main sources. We have primary microplastics coming from mainly land activities, such as microbreeds in skincare products, which can form up to 31% of microplastics in the ocean. And we also have secondary microplastics, which results from larger plastics breaking down over time, and they can take up to 81% of microplastic in the ocean. These tiny particles are nearly impossible to remove from the environment, making them a persistent threat to the marine ecosystem. So let's talk about how microplastics made their way into the marine food web, because this is where things starts to get concerning. You may be thinking, okay, tiny plastics floating in the ocean, how bad can this be? But the problem is that marine animals don't really understand the difference between real food and plastics. So basically, it all starts with planktons, which are uh, microscopic organisms that are basically the foundation of the food chain. When plankton ingest microplastics, those plastics don't just disappear in their body. They stay in the plankton's body for a longer time, and then small fish come and eat the planktons. These small fish get eaten by larger fish, and before you know it, microplastics have worked their way up to the predators like tuna or sharks, and even marine mammals. This process is called bioaccumulation, meaning that as microplastics move up the food chain, their concentration increases. So while a single plankton might have just a tiny amount of plastic on its system, by the time it reaches a larger fish, like a tuna, for example, that fish has ingested plastic from all the smaller organisms that it has ever eaten over time. And now this is where things get closer to us as humans. So humans like to eat seafood, right? So when we consume fish, especially larger species, we could also be ingesting microplastics that have been accumulating in the fish body over time. Okay, so now that we understand how microplastics move through the food web, let's talk about what happens once they are actually inside marine organisms. Because it's not just about swallowing plastic, it's about the chemicals that come with that plastic. So one very important thing to understand is that plastic just doesn't flow in the water harmlessly. They act like sponges, absorbing toxins from surrounding waters, and things like heavy metals, pesticides, and even endocrine disruptors, which are chemicals that can interfere within hormones, stick to these particles of plastics. So the first thing is that there is physical damage, because microplastics can cause blockage in the digestive system, leading to malnutrition. Imagine eating something that makes you feel full, but is not really providing any nutrients to your body. And over time, it leads to reduced energy levels, lower growth rates, and even lower production rates, which can have serious consequences for species survival. Another thing to understand is that there is also biological impacts. Since microplastics absorb toxins and chemicals, those chemicals can get released into the bloodstream once they are ingested. And there has been studies that have shown that these toxins can cause inflammation and organ damage, and even disrupt reproduction system, like I mentioned before. Okay, so we have talked about how microplastics harm marine organisms at individual levels. Now we're zooming out to see and look how they're impacting entire marine habitats. So microplastics aren't just affecting individuals, animals, they are literally reshaping entire environments. These tiny particles are being found everywhere, from the surface waters of the ocean to the deepest waters, and even embedded in the sands of our beaches. And like I have previously mentioned in the previous slides, one of the biggest concern is that microplastics don't just float around harmlessly. Instead, they are accumulated in specific areas based on the ocean current. And I like to think of it like dust in a house. If dust is left unattended, it will pile up in specific places. And in the ocean, these hotspots of plastics pollution are forming in deep seas sediments, coral reefs, and coastal areas where marine life is most concentrated. This is especially dangerous for filter feeders like oysters, clams, and corals. Since they naturally pull particles out of the water, they end up trapping larger amount of microplastics, which can lead to clog their feeding structures and all the side effects that I mentioned in the slide before. Um, I think that something surprising is that scientists have even found microplastics trapped in the Arctic sea ice. That means that as ice is melting due to climate change, we could see even more plastic being released into marine ecosystem, worsening the problem. So when we talk about plastic pollution, it's not just about individuals, animals eating it. It's about how microplastics are altering entire ecosystems and making habitats more toxic and most unlikely for marine life. Now I will be talking about coral reefs because they're one of the most fragile ecosystems when it comes to microplastic pollutions. Corals are already struggling because of climate change, ocean acidification, and rising temperatures. But now microplastics are making things worse. Tiny plastics particles get trapped in coral structures, and instead of filtering in nutrients, corals ended up filtering plastic. Over time, this made the reefs weaker and more fragile, making it easier to break apart and more likely to get diseases. Now let's talk about big marine mammals because they're also being affected. Whales, dolphins, and seals ingest microplastics through their food, causing them to build up a bigger amount of microplastic pollution in their bodies. Scientists have found plastics in whale stomach and dolphin tissues, meaning it's not only reaching their digestive system, but it's also going into their organs, and this can lead to inflammation, weak immune system, and other health issues. Baleen whales, which filter feed, taking a huge amount of water, swallowing just not food, but like everything that is surrounding, including plastic. If this continues, we could see population decline affecting entire ocean ecosystems. And this is just another proof that microplastics aren't just a small issue. Even though they start very small, they are also harming and affecting the biggest marine mammals and bigger animals in the marine ecosystem. I think it is ironic that we throw plastic away, but at the end, it comes right back to us. Microplastics have been found in our food, water, and even air. Scientists have detected microplastic inside our blood and even inside our lungs, which means that it's circulating inside our system. Since plastics absorbs toxic chemicals, we're not only taking in the plastic, but also of the harmful substances that they have picked up along the way. And we created plastic to make our life easier. And I think it should be very concerning that plastic is now part of us and is found inside our bodies. Now that we know how serious the problem is, what can we do about it? One of the biggest steps will be reducing plastic waste, especially single use plastic like plastic bags, bottles, and packagings. The less plastic we produce, the less plastic it will end up in the environment. We also need a better recycle system. Right now, there's a huge amount of plastic that isn't properly disposed of, and that's how it leaks into the ocean. A stricter regulations and improved waste management could help prevent this issue from getting bigger. Scientists are also working on type of plastics that break down naturally so they don't stick around in the environment forever. And as on the individual level, small choices like using reusable items and avoiding products with microbeads do add up at the end of the day. Even if we believe that our actions are just a tiny grain of sand, but when millions of people make small changes together, we can create an impact. And help this huge problem from spreading and being even bigger. At the end of the day, we created this plastic problem, but we also have the power to fix it. Microplastics are inside the oceans, marine life, and even inside our own bodies, but that doesn't mean that the damage is irreversible. If we reduce plastic waste, push for better solutions, and each do our small parts, we can help protect marine life and our own future. It's not just about one big change, it's about millions of small actions adding up together. And that will be all. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know. And here are some of the sources that I use. Thank you.